I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. I'm with
Renee Merrifield.
And here we are with Beyond the Ballot. Big day in BC.
It is. It is the throne speech. And I have to tell you, having been there now, for 5 throne speeches, 1 when I was not elected and 4 while I was, it's an exciting day. I mean, they'll shut down the actual Legislative Assembly to all of the guests and visitors, and you have to have a ticket to go in, and the gallery is full. It's got a lot of energy. There's a lot of pomp and ceremony that goes into it, and the speaker is chosen, and it's a big day in BC politics.
What can we expect today?
More of the same. We're going to see David Eby position himself against Trump. That is the new enemy, and he will try and do that in a really charismatic way. Now, you have to remember, the throne speech is not being read by Eby. The throne speech is actually being read by the Lieutenant Governor, who is new this year. So it'll be interesting to see how she does that. But for the most part, it's read in a more neutral way, and then it's dissected. And all of the MLAs that are sitting there will be scrolling and scribbling, because some of them could be called on as early as tomorrow to actually deliver responses to the throne speech, which are anywhere from 20 to 30 minute speeches that can really take a while. So. To prepare. So they'll be looking at it very eagerly and trying to dissect it. I expect him to focus on the economy. I expect him to focus on trying to get the natural resource sector. He sort of telegraphed that already by saying he's going to fast track all these projects that have been delayed by his government. So I thought Rob Shaw did an awesome job of actually, and Vaughn Palmer, of dissecting which of those projects were and how long they've been tied up under the NDP government. So I don't really see this as being anything really revolutionary. In fact, the Eby government has had a really hard time getting started. They've been largely absent. He did go with the other premiers down to Washington, D.C. What a disaster. Like, what a horrible, horrible disaster.
They didn't get to meet with anybody of any importance.
No, it's like basically one of the 5 deputy chiefs of staff and one sort of minor person. And the cost of that, the consulting firm that they hired, the lobbying firm that they hired, they're speculating it cost anywhere, between $100,000 and $125,000 to actually even get the meetings that they did get. So, this from a lobbying perspective, that would be considered pretty much a disaster.
And I think that's just a statement from the U.S. that we don't have a clear leader, so they're not willing to. Trump's not willing to meet with people that aren't the leader of the country.
No, and that can enact change. He did meet with Danielle Smith. She has something he wants, which is called energy. Mm-hmm. The rest of them, we don't really have a whole lot. And, Doug Ford, for as much bravado as he came out with it initially, he's really backpedaled. He's in the middle of an election himself. To take time to go to Washington, D.C. in the middle of an election is a little bit dicey. Maybe speaks to his confidence that he's going to win.
It looks like a shoe-in for him.
A little bit. I can't see the Ontario people, really taking a huge dramatic shift at this point. But I do think that it just speaks to Trump's literal unwillingness to negotiate with anyone who doesn't have the power to change.
Sticking with BC, it's been since October 5th, right?
Yeah, no, October 24th.
Oh, right. Yeah, after my birthday. Not that that's an important date.
No, it really is. It really is.
And then we're finally in session. That's a long time.
It's a very long time.
Yeah.
Typically what you would have is, the election would go through on October 19th, and then they would swear in all of the, it did take longer because they went to judicial recounts on 2 of the ridings, or 3 of the ridings, so that took a longer amount of time. But then, they get everyone sworn in November, and they should have a fall sitting session at least for 2 or 3 weeks where they have 1 or 2 bills that will come through. They didn't have anything. It's been,
and people would have got that $1,000 check at that time because now they're using the Trump excuse to not dole that check out.
It's interesting. Around our dinner table, we were talking with the kids, and one of our kids said, I don't know, he's going to hold my rent and give me $1,000. And I said to him, careful. this is an election promise that will not come to fruition. I said the one thing I know about the BC NDP are the broken promises and the litany of broken promises that they've left behind. This government is razor thin majority, largely through their agreement with the Greens. The Greens didn't really get a whole lot in that agreement. And if they're going to press forward on all of these resource sector jobs, I don't know where that leaves the Greens at all. So, the things that we should be focused on right now in the provincial politics is like on healthcare, on housing, on making sure that our economy is strong, and and on public safety, and that expose, the leaked memo from the BC Ministry of Health, damning. I mean, I just read the excerpts from it, and basically they know that there's a tremendous amount of safe supply that is flooding the market right now, and that they are finding it on the streets of British Columbia. Very scary times right now for BC, and basically a failure on the decriminalization experiment.
And especially with the spotlight on us for fentanyl and part of Trump's attacks on us, because he's saying that we're causing fentanyl deaths in the United States or contributing to them. And then Mark Carney was here in Kelowna and said that the Americans are having a fentanyl crisis. It's a concern here in Canada, and he got attacked for that as well.
Oh, anyone who is in the space right now, I mean, the X-verse lit up and basically just went at him. Everyone from psychiatrists who work in the space to those for the nonprofits, et cetera. It was like
playing down that crisis here. It seemed like especially in British Columbia, playing down that crisis here in Kelowna seemed to not sit well with very many people.
And speaks to his arrogance about not seeing the issues clearly. Mm-hmm. The interview that Brian Lilley did with Steve Bannon, I know it's 23 minutes. It's been viewed hundreds of thousands of times.
That must be one of Brian's most popular videos.
It is. He actually said that when he reposted it to make sure that those of us who hadn't seen it yet were careful to watch it. I've been really appreciative of Brian Lilley's voice.
His voice is growing, for sure.
Absolutely. He's definitely emboldened over the course of this last few years. But one of the things that Steve Bannon said is that, Canadians are very naive. And he actually turns to the camera and looks at the camera and says, Canada, like, wake up to how much the Chinese government has infiltrated. Now, we've seen a lot of that lately with Sam Cooper's expose on how much they're affecting our politics. We know that they're affecting the fentanyl crisis, and we know that that we're basically a sieve. We need to figure out why. And Steve Bannon goes so far as to say it's a sovereignty crisis right now. And as much as the U.S. is trying to about face with this sovereignty crisis, Canada has to do way more, and we are way more naive as to how much China has already infiltrated.
And if you look at the differences, what's going on with Mexico right now, the Mexican government just invited the American military in there to train their people on going after the cartels. And we're still working around with, I think, rental helicopters and stuff like that. Like, the American military is a machine that many of the people in the world are scared of. And to get them on the ground training, I think would probably put some fear in some of the Mexican cartels as well.
Yeah, as long as it was just training and not that policing, because the last thing we want to do is invite the American military.
No, it was training. It was clearly training. Some people tried to jump the gun and say it was more,
but what the Mexican president also did, and I was so proud of her. She's like, you need to get control of your guns.
Yeah,
and I don't know if that's going to...
That was part of the deal.
That was part of the deal. I don't know if that's going to happen. I mean, the Americans really like their guns, but it definitely was a strong pushback, because it's very difficult to get a gun in Mexico, but they flood over the border from the United States.
But it would show how serious Canada is if we invited their military in to train our people to strengthen our borders. I think that would be a really strong show of force, because when those I can't remember those planes where they flip the blades up and they land. It looks pretty impressive when those guys land.
The Blackhawks?
No, they're not black. They're planes, right? But they're troop loaders or kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So troop planes. Yeah.
But Steve Bannon also makes the case for why Trump's doing it. Because Brian Lilley, I think 3 or 4 times says, so Trump's not just trolling the Canadian people. He's not just poking the bear or pushing a button or not just mocking our leader. And Steve Bannon over and over gets us, no, listen to what he's saying. It's part of a far greater plan, a far bigger plan. And as he was talking, he said, like, Greenland, Canada, Panama Canal. Why does he want those three aspects? And he talked about it from a military perspective and from a national security perspective. And he said, like, what Trump's trying to do in the Panama Canal is make sure that Russia and China can never meet in terms of their navies to attack in the Caribbean. He's trying to make sure that that China can't come from the north, that Russia can't come from the north. And he talked about how much China has already infiltrated on our northern border. Yeah. So when he's talking about Canada being the 51st state, he basically is saying there is a plan that will go into effect. And when Canada has a leader, and he even said, make sure it's not a left-wing leader who leads you off a cliff and into an abyss. Because he said the only one that Trump will negotiate with is one that actually is one that will deal with the military in an appropriate fashion.
And we've neglected our military. There's no doubt about that.
Horrifically
right?
so. And I did find it interesting that even before this interview was done, that Pierre Poilievre was all the way up in the north, really talking about how he was going to reinforce military operations up in the north.
Harper started that way back then.
He did.
And then it just kind of. Our military complement right now is 55,000. Supposedly full complement is 77,000, and we've not been spending our NATO commitments, and even the military that we've been talking about sleeping bags. We couldn't even get proper sleeping bags for our troops. It's not a good situation for our troops. Chrystia Freeland has now come out and said that she's going to increase pay, because that's a big thing. Like you're asking these people not only to go put their lives on the line, but you're asking them to kill strangers. That's a big thing, right? But we're paying them $43,000 as a starting salary. We're paying bureaucrats $100,000+ a year, and then they refuse to go to work.
Yeah,
so we really have to look at how much we're offering these young men and women to put their lives on the line. Sticking with BC though a bit, inflation in Canada up a bit, ticked up a bit, 1.9%, but in BC again higher.
Always, BC has trended higher since COVID. And we've been drawing the BC NDP's attention to it. They have absolutely refused to deal with it in any way, shape, or form. But we have outpaced. I think it's now going on, something like 28 out of 32 different months that we've actually trended higher than the national average. That's not a good statistic, especially when your GDP growth and your GDP per capita has tanked and has gone from the best in the country to the worst in the country. And it's no secret why. We were really bolstered by the 4 mega projects that the former government of the BC Liberals had put into place and gotten past the point of no return. The cancellation of things like the George Massey. Now it's a tunnel again. It was a bridge, but the cancellation of that bridge project and moving it to a tunnel, but now it's dead in the water. I was talking with a couple of engineering firms a couple weeks ago who've been involved on the George Massey tunnel, and they were laughing, going, "That sucker's never going to be built." The environmental disaster that it would create by sinking this big, huge concrete tube into the Fraser is just an absolute ridiculous waste of energy. Never mind the environmental aspects of damage that would be done to the surrounding areas that are necessary in order to get that George Massey tunnel underway. So whether or not they could ever get it through an environmental review, never mind an Indigenous review. Obviously, there's the Musqueam band there that is set over our. There's no way that that's going through. So it'll be really interesting to see how everything takes shape. But the NDP has not moved forward with big projects to replace the 4 that are basically all but done now. And when you don't have big projects, your labor force goes down and your economy takes a hit.
We're bleeding mind and capital to Alberta and the United States. LNG, the BC Liberals were really strong proponents of that. Sorry, we got some fire alarm testing going on here, so we have to apologize for that, but we can't do much about that. But LNG was one of the things that you guys promoted. How hard is it to watch Japan go to the United States and ink a big LNG deal, and now India talking about energy? How tough is that to stomach, to watch that? Lost opportunity.
It's brutal. Lost, like $1 trillion lost opportunities. And literally it's because the NDP are sleeping at the wheel. It's largely because they have been in these coalition governments with the Greens as well. And the Greens are emphatic. You know, there will be no more LNG projects released at all. So are they going to get these ones through? No. But, if we were looking at emissions as a global issue that we should be, and I would argue that is a huge failure of how we actually measure emissions, we should be looking at what BC LNG could be offsetting on a global stage. National Bank
replacing coal.
Yep, National Bank did in February of 24 a huge report on what that would look like, and basically it's 3 times Canada's entire emissions that would be replaced on a yearly basis, or that would be lowered on a yearly basis if our LNG projects just got over into Europe and Asia.
I know that the easy thing to do right now is pick Trump as the bad guy, but it was 10 years of these policies that put us at the state where we don't have options, like blocking the Northern Gateway pipeline, blocking the East-West pipeline. And like the LNG one is tough for me to watch, right? You look at when the Japanese were here 2 years ago begging, when the Germans were here begging for LNG from us. And we said there's no business case for LNG. It seems like there's still a business case for LNG.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. And I like what you just said there, Jim. We really have to take a look in the mirror. Where we are today, and yes, Trump is an easy villain. He's an easy villain for our premiers. He's an easy villain for our leaders. But we have to look at what got us to this point. And what got us to this point are the policies. And, as we were talking about Chrystia Freeland coming and doing an about face, and even Carney saying, we're going to look at carbon tax. Mark my words, Carney is bringing in a price on carbon. I don't care what he calls it, how he calls it. Like that has been his mantra.
Like carbon cross-border something.
Yeah, like we're gonna put tariffs on anything that doesn't have carbon tax already, so that it equalizes to how expensive ours is. It's like this is the most ridiculous thing ever, right? Like it's. So for me, watch what they have done and look at where we are today, because that is a direct result of the policies that have been in place to this moment.
You want to go see what music is going on out there, Rommel?
I was going to start dancing.
There you go. We got some background music going. So the tariffs are scary for BC. So I guess it'll be interesting to see what David Eby comes out with policies and projects. But I mean, I've heard some of the talk is like it's going to be green projects, but like our bread and butter is really the LNG right here, and oil and gas and stuff. Like that's the quick, easy money, I guess, to get out there. But
yeah, our quick, easy money is our natural resource sector, and our quick, easy lowering of our housing prices would be on the lumber aspect, and really, making sure that made in BC lumber was available for our housing industry, and that was focused on. With the new STEP code, that's becoming very difficult to try and implement because of all of the steel that's necessary in a wood building, which I know sounds ironic. If you want to get into any sort of debate on that, we can definitely talk. But you have to increase the amount of steel the higher the building in order to utilize wood. So it's kind of a juxtaposition. But as the STEP code keeps getting and ratcheting up, it's getting more and more expensive to build. We need to look at cost measures to try and reduce that, and our own lumber resources would be one of those.
Yeah, regulation and red tape and all these, all these costs really add so much. I remember even in Kelowna here, which is a small example, is like, when people were building carriage homes, and just to get a permit, I think it went up 10 times because the province said that the permitting in Kelowna is way too cheap.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Yeah. But permitting is probably your smallest. A really interesting policy that I think that should be enacted by every city. I'm going to do a shout out for, you had Doug Gilchrist on your your program last week, I'm going to do a shout out. This should be implemented across the board. City of Delta is proposed that they delay DCC payments. So not reduction, nothing like less going to the cities, but they're delaying that payment until occupancy permit rather than building permit. That is like on a building of like, any sort of tower, you're looking at 3-year build.
Helping cash flow management.
Yeah, and that money is expensive money because it's going in at the very beginning, right? So delaying that money going in till the very end is actually a huge amount of interest cost that doesn't have to be transferred to the end user, and I think would end up reducing the amount.
Doesn't add a lot of value to the building either, right?
And the cities don't need it. The cities literally have their accounts are so loaded and so full of this money. If you look, I mean, City of Kelowna has almost $1 billion in their reserve funds. You know, the City of Vancouver is in the billions of dollars. Like the amount of money that these cities have sitting there from DCCs being paid is exorbitant. So it certainly is a little bit of a way to try and reduce the cost without reducing the overall amount that the city would take.
One of the things I do want to touch on, I've seen a lot of it now because the United States is talking about building a sovereign wealth fund. Norway has this amazing sovereign wealth fund built off their oil and gas industry where they have over $300,000 in per person. Yes, and the only one that exists in Canada is Alberta. Alberta has a Heritage Trust Fund. BC could have done something like that too if we would be utilizing our natural resources more so. Canada could have this massive sovereign wealth fund, and yet we don't.
And yet we don't. And it's a huge miss. It's a huge missed opportunity. Canada could be so prosperous. And I think that's the hardest part for me right now is to watch and see that, you know, it's taken almost this bully to show us that we should have been in the gym all these years, you know? We should have been eating right and in the gym. And instead we're like on a couch kind of hanging out and we haven't honed our skills. So I do think that it's time. It's never too late. Let's do it today. Let's do it now. And, you know, if you haven't seen Pierre Poilievre's speech from Saturday on Flag Day, which for me, I was really proud of. A lot of my neighbors had their flags hanging out, and it was exciting to see 60th anniversary of our federal flag. But that speech was probably the most hopeful and probably the most impactful that I've seen of any of the leaders give to date. I mean, obviously, we haven't seen a lot of the leaders on the Liberal side give those types of speeches yet, but it was really a Canada first and Canada always. I was proud to be Canadian, and I was proud of our country in that. And you know, one of the pundits afterwards that was writing about it said, and they're actually a former liberal advisor. They were saying Pierre effectively wrapped himself in the flag, and it was almost done to perfection.
So CBC was doing a recap. They were there and they were doing a recap of the thing too, and then they had to say though, which is really interesting, that Canada First is a stolen idea from Sir Wilfrid Laurier, a famous Liberal. And I'd say, hey, great, then you can't knock it because
awesome.
It's a great idea that they co-opted or whatever, right? So it's not only a conservative idea, it's a Liberal idea.
There we go. And
I believe it's a Canadian idea.
It's a Canadian idea. I mean,
and it's about time we put Canada first, right? Because I mean, you're elected to put Canada first. That's why people elect you to put Canada first.
But and Canada first, but not Canada only. Like the aspect of we're going to need other countries. We're going to need trade with other countries. We're going to need the security of other countries and alliances with other countries and trade negotiation. And all of these things we have absolutely left to the side over the course of the last 9 years. Never have we before, except under Harper, signed more trade agreements. I think there were 124 different trade agreements that were signed under Harper's very short tenure on, basically two minority governments. So I do, or one minority, one majority. But Trudeau has just basically left all of those to the side and has not fostered, and in fact, weakened our relationship with China, weakened our relationship with India, and left us and said no to Japan and Germany, and basically left us with very few options at this point. So it's going to take a lot to kind of renew that and restore that.
Yeah, I would caution people when they're watching these attacks on the United States right now, even the booing of the national anthem
Yeah.
is dangerous. Like if the liberals are playing it up though, Melanie Joly out there really pushing hard against, like the Americans right now. And I don't think that's a great place for us to be, because if we look at the analogy, family first, you look after your family first, but you also want to look after your neighbors, right? Because if the neighborhood falls apart, then it obviously hurts the family as well. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of our things, is that we still rest comfortably underneath the protection of the United States umbrella. I mean, because
Yeah.
our military is nowhere able to protect Canada right now. We rest underneath that umbrella, so we should have respect for that at least.
Yeah, and I think, I think it's easy for Canadians to think to themselves, well, there's no real war here, right? Like, yeah, there's a war between Russia and Ukraine, and there's a, there's wars going on outside of us, but there's no real war here. I think Steve Bannon, and this is something he did really powerfully in the interview with Brian Lilley, is that he talked about China doesn't wage wars, with hand-to-hand
It's
combat.
economic war. Yeah?
They'll do economic war, they'll do infrastructure war, they will do, infiltration war, and that is their strength, that is their superpower. And Steve Bannon did an excellent job of just articulating what that looks like and articulating how that it already exists today in the US, and how that's what, President Trump is trying to shed, and how that already exists in Canada, and how Trump is trying to push us to deal with our own issues. So it's going to be really interesting on a national level how the leadership races ensue. And it was interesting in the interview with Rosie and Carney. She asked him about his conflicts of interest, and he was kind of cagey about them. There's speculation that they're actually not going to that he's not actually going to become the prime minister. That he's going to leave Trudeau in as the prime minister while the election is going on, and ask Trudeau to call the election right away when the House resumes. And I was kind of pushing back on my Ottawa friends, like, why would they do that? And he said, and they were talking, and they said, well, because then Carney doesn't actually have to disclose any of his conflicts of interest. He doesn't have to disclose any of his business dealings at this point. So that's a little scary to me, that we could have someone running for the role of prime minister that we don't actually have full disclosure on. In Canada, we've always done a better job of that. I know that I had to disclose every amount of income that I received from anywhere. So it's a little scary to me to see that would not have to be done by
I
someone
recommend
running
everybody
for
go
prime
and
minister.
watch that CBC interview with Rosie Barton and Mark Carney.
Yeah, he got a little cagey at that point.
Yeah. And then also watch, he made some accusations against Pierre Poilievre that turned out to be false.
Yeah.
And watch that too. Pierre had a response to it. And then go and watch that speech, like Renee said, on what Pierre Poilievre made on Canada on Flag Day. And it's an important thing. I mean, I believe that, patriotism has kind of been waning in Canada, and Trudeau even said that himself. And part of that is because he views Canada as a post-nationalist state, and we didn't really work on patriotism. Like, we had events canceled on Canada Day. Remember, like, there were so many places saying they didn't want to do Canada Day because it was, for whatever reasons. And all of a sudden now, when the Liberals need it, they're wrapping themselves in the flag.
Yeah, if we pull this all the way back to the provincial, even BC, really was pushing against any sort of patriotism, any sort of Canada aspects, and then all of a sudden it was all over social media for the BC NDP celebrating the Flag Day, and it was like, wait, you guys are trying to get rid of all this stuff. Like, you guys are actually trying to take this out of our language, and now you're trying to put it back in. If I pull us back to the provincial politics, the one thing that I'm going to be watching pretty carefully that I read yesterday in Rob Shaw's article in the National Post was that he actually said that there's going to be very few bills that are brought in during this first session in BC. That's a little concerning to me. That light legislative agenda is a little bit strange, I guess. And I'm concerned that means that, or signals that there's not going to be much going on with the BC NDP. The only reason I could think of that is that they're afraid to lose a vote, and they have such a razor-thin majority, and some of their people are out right now, that I think they might be actually concerned that they could lose a vote in the House.
Well, we'll leave it there, I think, unless you have something else you want to
No,
talk
it's
about.
great.
I think that was great. And then I guess next week we'll talk about the throne
Next
speech
week.
and what's going to happen from there. We actually have a sitting government, so it'll probably be a lot more focus on what's happening here in British Columbia.
Yes, and then we'll have a budget soon after. So very exciting times.
And then maybe we'll have some more news on what's going on with our federal thing, because a lot of people are speaking that Carney wants the election to go right away. And Jagmeet has sent a memo out to his people. Jagmeet Singh of the NDP has sent a memo out to his people.
Get ready.
Get ready, and then they got to find some candidates as well.
Yeah, I don't think the NDP are going to fare very well in this federal election.
Yeah, there's even danger of Jagmeet Singh losing his seat. I think Canadians might be upset with what's been going on.
I think so too.
All right, we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.